particularly in Europe. Okay, so early works included Don Quixote. That's a really good one. That was in 1605. I did include a link, so you can take a look at that. Let's see here. Don Quixote was considered one of the very first modern novels. Um, so you can take a look at that and see how that, if you compare that to Sir Gawain's The Green Knight, how might you compare them? Okay, there is a link there you can take a look at. The Pilgrim's Progress in 1676 was another one by John Bunyan. Just some examples of watching how there's that growth of the novel as we know it to be. The novel grew in popularity during the 18th century with authors like Daniel Defoe, Robinson Crusoe. I'm sure a lot of you have probably heard that. That was in 1719. Take a look there at the link. We also have Pamela and Tom Jones around the same time. The establishing of the novel is a popular genre for exploring personal and social issues in prose. And when we say prose, Prose, prose is actual like full books, like written. Okay, in case you're curious what that meant. The 19th century would be considered the novel's golden age. We've talked about the golden age in film. There's also golden age in novels. The 19th century is often, again, called the golden age. We got Charles Dickens. I'm going to pull up my books over here. Charles Dickens, of course, I always bring him up. I can't help it. I mean, he's got some good work. We also have Jane Austen. Look at that. Look at how much work Jane Austen. Oh, so much writing. Jane Austen, she's got some good stuff there. We also have Tolstoy, War and Peace. I'm pretty sure you've probably heard of that too. Was that upside down? That was upside down. War and Peace. I'm currently working on War and Peace. Y'all, it is heavy. It's good. It's great. But it is definitely, it's War and Peace. I believe War and Peace was originally written in Russian and translated. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. I believe that is the case. So, anyway, really good stuff. Others creating masterpieces that addressed themes of, we're talking about social change, morality, and the human condition. War and Peace, absolutely the human condition. And of course, Charles Dickens, always talking about human condition. And then we got our Jane Austen. Yes, absolutely. Very much so. These are great. This is, I think, as we start, the reason why it's considered the golden age is this is honing into exactly that. Life in some of the heavier times, right? Anyway, so realism became a dominant style, emphasizing character-driven stories. This is exactly what we talk about when we discuss things like, I keep popping up the Christmas Carol. I think it's because of Charles Dickens. It's the most remembered. I mean, we got Muppets doing movies on the Christmas story. Like, the Christmas story has been done like so many different times in so many different ways. And I think that's why I bring this up. Because it is character driven and it reflects the complexities of everyday life. Jane Austen, again, excellent job. Jane Austen does a really good job. Tolstoy, yes. For us, if we were to read that now, it's out of touch for our particular generation, but these still apply. I would say, again, Jane Austen and Dickens do a really good job of that. Great Expectations. I did include a link. Again, it's another Charles Dickens one. And then we also have Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Let me see. I have to see if I have a link to that one. I can't remember if I do. Again, Jane Austen, one of her many books, Pride and Prejudice. I'm sure a lot of you have probably already read it. Majority of my literature students are probably even more well-read than I am. So anyway, those are just some realism type of authors that, again, are reflecting that golden age of the novel. We think about modern and postmodern novels. That's the 20th century and beyond. These are often... It's the rise of modern and modernism in literature from like James Joyce and Ulysses. I'm sure I have that book, doesn't matter. Ulysses is a good one. We have Virginia Woolf. There's also I guess you would call it fan fiction. Nobody's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf. That's a reflection or a fan fiction, I think, of what Virginia Woolf writes. So anyway, if you already know things like Mr. Dalloway, or Mrs. Dalloway, sorry, Mrs. Dalloway from Virginia Woolf, you can take a look at Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf, which is actually fan fiction of Virginia Woolf's work. Anyway, and then Franz Kafka's The Trial. Franz Kafka does a couple other things, but that one would probably work best for the postmodernist type of novels. All right. These works experiment with narrative techniques, stream of consciousness, and the fragmented narratives. So again, when we talk about modern, postmodern, it's like the poetry. It's this really unique way of taking the things that we understand a novel to be and then kind of adding a little bit, a little bit more to it to give us more of a unique avant-garde type of way of looking at it. Kind of like the Red Shoes when we talk about film. Since I have a link there for you to watch it, I like to use that as an example of how you might look at postmodern novels in the way in which we look at writing. Okay, so hopefully that helps you. Postmodern writers such as Margaret Atwood is a good one. Challenge traditional conventions of the novel by bleeding genres and subverting expectations and questioning the nature of reality and storytelling. Okay. Again, we're really trying to look at things, even though we have a beginning, a middle, and an end. This is how we understand a novel to be. And then we kind of throw a little bit of a twist in there to understand what is reality. What are we looking at? What are we thinking of? And that's the goal, right? The goal is to, again, avant-garde, unique ways of being able to read and tell stories, right? To tell a story and how is the audience perceiving that. That's what I love about postmodernism. I love, I love the twists. Who do I have who's good at that? I have a whole bunch of very modern writers that I could probably point to who do some of that good stuff, but they're not names that are really well known, so we won't go down that rabbit hole. Anywho, let's get into, now we know the history. We already kind of know the history. It all bleeds very much together to a lot of the other things that we see as we've gone through, whether it was dramas, whether it was films, short stories. They all, for every time period, every piece of timeline, you can kind of see how they bled into one another, whether it was, the way that poems were written, the way that short stories were written, and then the way drama was introduced. And the same thing with film. They kind of follow a very similar pattern as time has gone through. Okay. I hope that made sense to you. That made sense in my brain. All right. When we talk about the elements of a novel, I'm going to be repeating myself. It's pretty much the same way in which we've looked at a short story, the same way we've looked at dramas, the same way we've looked at films. They're all the same pieces that help us tell the story. We've got our plot. We're going to... Same old. This thing's getting all crinkly because I use it so often. But the idea here is, right, we're bringing our exposition. What's happening? What's our beginning? The one good thing about a novel is with a novel, you can actually create those very unique genres, the vampires and science fiction. And that's the beautiful thing about a novel, is you are being given a bigger space to create a lot more. A lot more things that are creative in the sense of, like when we think of, like Harry Potter. When you think of Harry Potter, and you have to really develop these, you have to develop enough for it to be believable, and you need space and you need time to do that. With a novel, you got plenty of it. Short stories a lot harder, but with a novel you can do that because you have all this area for exposition. You have a lot of time to develop before you even get to the conflict. Conflict can be halfway through the book because you've done so much exposition and development to get to this place, right? Well, obviously, but usually, conflict can be anywhere. I say halfway through. But with a book, the thing is with a conflict, the majority of the entire novel could be, that whole conflict, that whole telling of the story. And the climax, maybe it is the very, very end, or maybe there's more to it. Like, that's the cool thing about a novel. It doesn't fully go exactly as we kind of point out here. It's just extended. It's more full, as it were. Again, so we're setting our scene, as it were. We've got our rising conflict. I have conflict down here, but obviously it's a whole thing. It's pretty much majority of the story is going to be your conflict as you develop develop it throughout, and then you have your climax. It's that turning point, that thing that gives us rise. And sometimes there might be points within that story that has multiple little pieces that get us to something even bigger. Our falling action here, that resolution, it's the consequences of what happened here. And with the novel, oftentimes the consequences go out a little bit further. Remember, short stories sometimes just end, or maybe they have a little bit, but sometimes with the novel, it has to bring us out even further. And it just, again, every book is different, every novel is different. That's the beauty of it. This is just a general idea of how that usually goes. And again, a resolution is down here. Climax isn't the end all be all of the novel. Sometimes you've got a lot down here to get us to this point. You might have a climax, but you might have a lot before we get to the end. I think Lord of the Rings does a lot of that. Especially right when you think you've hit the climax, right when you think you've hit the resolution, it feels like it just kind of keeps going before it actually gets to the actual resolution. So that's kind of a decent example. Many novels, there is a conflict, whether it's internal or external, that drives that plot moving forward. And the goal, as we've talked about before, is that character development throughout. Do they or don't they? Will they or won't they? What is it that we're seeing from these characters, from this beginning, that original exposition? What did we do here? Like, who were they here versus what happens here at the end? And in fact, in between, there's going to be a lot of things that get us. Sometimes this climax is that ultimate change within the character that brings us here. Sometimes it's because the climax that, creates the resolution, creates the character development down here. Sometimes it's at the very end when they're like, oh shit, right? It all depends on the novel, on what it is that you're reading. Anyway, so this is a very vague, sad little attempt of trying to explain a novel, which is hard to do. So, but you get the general idea of what we're looking at here. It's easier with a short story, or even a movie sometimes. Okay, so with characters, again, with a novel, what's really cool about a novel is now we have opened it up for character development. We have an opportunity here for many characters to come and go, to live, to die, to just do so much. And that's usually a lot of times you can have a lot more supporting characters, a lot more things, people and characters and things that help develop as we move forward. But you always have your protagonist. You always have your main character, the one that the reader is meant to empathize with in some way. That person who is kind of helping us lead us through this story, depending on the point of view. We'll get to that in a second, as per usual. But anyway, so that protagonist is the one person we're supposed to want to be, empathetic towards and go, okay, let's keep following them through the story. The antagonist, as we know, is a character that forces the opposition to the protagonist. It's usually what's creating our conflict, right? Who's the antagonist? Who are the people who now, whether or not the protagonist has to, fight for their life, fight for their safety, fight for the human, fight for whatever, some kind of, I say fight, that's not really quite the thing, but what's the thing that they have to, the protagonist has an opposition. Who's the opposition? Who's the antagonist? Who's the one who's creating said conflict that's bringing us towards this climax? What does that say? We have an internal and external conflict. And when we think about Lovey in our book that we are reading, Wild Meat and the Bully Burgers, who's the protagonist and who's the antagonist? Who's the antagonist? And is it possible to say that Lovey is her own antagonist? Is she the one getting away of her own growth? All right, so think about that. Or is there something else? Is it, is it her sister that gets in the way? Is it her mother? Is it society? Who is the antagonist within her, within this book that gets in the way of Lovey's growth? Okay. Again, supporting characters, we got Lovey, we got her mom, we got her dad, we've got her sister, we've got her best friend, we've got, Phyllis. We have all these characters that are playing a huge role of Lovey's development. So Lovey goes through a lot. You're going to see a lot of this as we go through, to even get to the climax. And how far down the book do we even get to the climax? And what does that resolution look like? Do we have a resolution for this particular story? This is what I want you to pay attention to as you're reading the novel. I'm sure you've probably, if you haven't already finished it, you might be halfway through. But I want you to look at the development of the characters within this novel and what that looks like. Obviously, the main goal here is understanding what Lovey's development is and what her character does throughout. But you can also see how maybe other characters might help her, might hinder her. Who is it and what is getting in the way? What is the opposition of her growth? You tell me, what are you seeing in there? Again, character development is absolutely the key to novels, and the author, this particular author, Lois Ann Yamanaka, does a very good job creating a very complex situation with multi-dimensional characters. Yeah, you can see definitely for each character, they create a little bit of a certain feel. Even though you are not the main character, you can feel Lovey's feelings towards each character, especially her father and her mother, her best friend and her sister. You know, how does that all look? And what creates motivation for her as she does the next thing that Lovey does, right? What are some emotions that you're feeling? Remember Rags? Remember that particular chapter? What is creating the conflict there? Because yeah, there's little, for to be honest with you, every chapter has a little bit of its, like, you know, kind of internal conflicts and stuff that kind of push our character to the next level. And during Rags, when Lovey gets her period, what are we seeing there? What is the development and the complexities that we see? Because when we think about what she's dealing with, there's a lot of layers, right? We got a lot going on where we have society's influence on her opinion about having her period, her relationship with her father, the way her mother acts when she's telling her to go get the pads, and what happens when Lovey uses them all up and what her mother makes her go do. You know, we think about these moments within the story that influence Lovey and her growth, just like the Bully burgers. And you all know who Bully is, right? And what happens when she is expected to eat these burgers? What then does that do to her character, to maybe her psyche, to the development of the story itself? So each one of these situations has this big influential impact on our main character and how they perceive the world, how they perceive themselves, how they perceive others, and the way the world looks towards them. Because in the very beginning, we talk about how Lovey wanted to be Howley. She wanted to be Shirley Temple. Why? Because she didn't have, what do you call that? She didn't see herself representation. She didn't have representation in TV, in commercials, in movies. Like, she didn't see herself. So she thought because of that, she hated herself. She thought that she wasn't good enough. She wasn't the Shirley Temple. She wasn't the little white girl that she wanted to be, because based on what she was seeing, she wasn't good enough because she wasn't seeing herself. This is why representation is so important. Anyway, how is that helping the development of the characters? I go and delve into that in this moment so that you understand what I'm looking for when I'm talking about character development and supporting characters, and what that multi-dimensional characters looks like. What are the motivations of these characters? Whether it's Lovey's motivation on something, or her sister's, or her mother's, or her father's. What are the things that are driving these characters in the story? Okay. And how is it pushing forward the plot and the themes? Okay, there are so many themes in this book. There's like feminism, there's morality, there is, oh my God, I could just go on. Love, there is social class, there is let me see. Colonialism, for freaking sure. There's so many pieces of themes that work for this particular novel, and I'd love you to kind of point out and show me what you're seeing and using the book to validate these points of this particular novel. Okay. And then point of view, again, same thing. You might have noticed in one of the other quizzes, if you only put, if you put third person, or if you put third person with a 3, like the number 3, or if you did a third person omniscient, it might have said wrong, but I went through and fixed it. So third person omniscient is okay to use as an example for a point of view. So I was making it simple by using either third person or omniscient, but you could use either one. Because it is novels again open us up for bigger space and bigger opportunities for bigger creativity in ways in which we can tell a story and how we want to show the point of view. Okay, so the narrative perspective is a very crucial element to the novel itself. It determines how the story is told. Like, why do we need a first person, view versus a third person versus the omniscient, or even a stream of consciousness? Why do these matter? That's the thing I want you to pay attention to in the novel. Why do they use the point of view? Why does Lois Ann Yamanaka use the point of view that she uses in this novel? Why does it work this way versus any other way in which she would write said novel? Okay, how is it helping us to understand the development of the character and the plot and the theme and how everything grows and develops throughout the story? Okay, so that's something to consider. This is why point of view is really important. The first person narrative, as we've talked about before, I'm just going to reiterate a little bit. It's using the I to tell the story. I love how, I get his name wrong every time. When we talk about, it's gonna drive me nuts if I don't get his name right. I'm sorry, I'm wasting time trying to figure it out. Anyway, one of our short stories, Powder. Why? Oh my God, I love him and I'm getting his name wrong. Anyway, you guys already know who I'm talking about. He always uses I. And when he uses I, even though this is a short story we're talking about, in using the I, it almost makes it feel like it is nonfiction versus fiction. Even though his writing is fiction, we read it as nonfiction because of that use of I. That's what makes his stories so impactful for what he is doing. It is not a, hey, this is what really happened. It's just how he is telling these stories. Okay, so using the I versus any other way, what's the importance of that and why does it matter in these particular stories? Third person limited, remember we're talking about limited here. It's the narrator is outside of the story but only has access to the thoughts of one character, usually the protagonist. And in order for us, when we're using this third person limited view, the goal here is, again, we're still able to pull away and see this character, but we only know from the character's point of view. We can't read anyone else's mind. That's important because it's going to give us, again, more space around the character so we can kind of see what's going around and around the character, but not all the people. Does that make sense? So it's kind of like, if I use I, it's only what I can see. But if I pull back and say he, but I know what they're thinking, it's a little bit easier for me to kind of pull back, but still feel more of this character. But we're still limited. We can only see so much. When we go into third person omniscient, we know everything about all the characters. We now can feel all the feelings from all the people, right? And so one good thing about that is we can almost help the audience predict what is about to happen. I think Kurt Vonnegut's Galapagos does a really good job of that, where it sees all the people and it sees all their thoughts and it almost preemptively tells you everything that's going to happen. But he does such a good job that you keep reading, like, how did this happen? Like, even though we already know it's going to happen, he gives us this third person omniscient view where we can now feel what everyone's feeling, hear what everyone's, thinking. I just hear what they're thinking. You already know what they're thinking and what their actions are. Versus if it's only third person, limited, you're only knowing the back view of this one character, but not the people around it. I hope that's helping. I might have to do like another video where someone says it a little bit better. Anyway, the goal here is with the omniscient, we're like, it's God's view. Omniscient would be, what is God seeing and what is he, he can see everyone, he can hear everyone, he's seeing this. Versus the limited person is only one person who has a honed in view of that main character. Okay. Stream of consciousness, which I don't think, I'm trying to think of, I don't really cover too much of that in any of the other stories because it's really only left for a novel because it's so big. Anyway, the stream of consciousness is a narrative style that attempts to depict the flow of a character's thoughts and feelings using the modernist novels. Who does that? Is that in The Trials at Kafka? Might be Kafka. I have to remember. But this stream of consciousness, the idea is you're literally in someone's brain watching their thoughts as they go through. I know Tobias Wolff, that's who it is. Tobias Wolff does the eye. Tobias Wolff also does a short story called The Bullet. It's pretty grody, but it has a little bit of stream of consciousness to it. So that would kind of be an okay example. I think Kafka's Trial is the one that does it. I'd have to look it up again for you all. But in other words, the stream of consciousness is the literal view of somebody's thoughts as they are coming through. It's the one where the guy gets on the train and they're walking through as he gets on the train and goes through this whole thing. Anyway, sometimes I read too much and then I forget all the things, as you can see by all the books. I can't remember what's what. So forgive me on that. That being the case, the three main ones we'll be considering for point of view is going to be first person, third person limited, and then third person omniscient. Stream of conscious won't really apply to what it is we're covering for our particular novel. So anyway, just keep that in mind as we move forward. I don't really have good examples right now. I'll try and find a good link in here so that if you see a link under stream of consciousness, click that. It's going to send you to something that I found. The theme, we talked about themes throughout the entire semester, and you've noticed I've tried to kind of guide you into the type of themes that I'm looking for. Oftentimes you might have mentioned a theme. I'm like, but what theme did we cover in lecture? And that always comes back to, we talk about self-identity. We talk about romance or love. We talk about morality. We talk about social class. I don't think we really talked necessarily about freedom so much. I don't know if, I guess our novel would have some level of that, but I don't really know if that'd be necessarily a theme for what we're working with, or power. But those are themes that we would be working with in this particular unit for the novel. The theme is very much obviously revealed throughout the characters' actions, settings, and conflict. So when we're talking about Wild Meat and the Bully Burgers, they have all the themes because we know morality, right? Think of the things that have died or that do die in the in the book. Sometimes in my brain, books come out as movies, so forgive me on that one. But what type of themes of morality show up for Lovey throughout the book? What stands out to you? What parts of social class? Absolutely, social class stands out. That's like a huge theme. Feminism, I wouldn't know if I would necessarily say that is, I guess you could throw out feminism. The biggest thing for her, I would say, is identity. A little bit of love, mostly identity throughout this whole book. We don't really have power or freedom in there. You might be able to pull it. I don't know. I'd be very surprised if you're able to find a way in which those worked. Power would work better in a book like, we talk about Tolstoy, War and Peace. Even you might say there's definitely a little bit of power grab when we talk about The Christmas Carol and Scrooge, that kind of thing. So I don't know if you could really call that being a theme within the book that we're reading. Okay. Again, what actions, what part of setting, what part of conflict is telling us these particular themes? So again, the book's really big, so you're going to have to break it up into pieces in which you're going to say, the themes that we saw kind of intertwined was definitely identity. It was a huge part of this, huge part, especially being a female, especially being Japanese, especially being on the island of Hawaii in the timeline in which it was set. You're going to have to do a little research on that for the context and the historical context and the cultural context. Themes you're going to notice are going to kind of blend a little bit together with the context that it was written. So when we talk about identity, the cultural context obvious is going to be being a female within the time that the book was written. So I'm not going to give you everything. You got to find it. Okay, so you got to tell me like when the book was written and how that influenced. Let me rephrase that. when the book was written versus when the time, the setting was for the book, because that makes a bit of a difference, versus when Lois and Yamanaka wrote the book versus it being written, like the timeline or the setting of the particular book itself. Because Yamanaka writes it from it's not a nonfiction book, it is a fiction, it's fake, but it is coming from a past, probably possible experiences that she might have, had in her lifetime. You're gonna have to give me the historical and the cultural context of the author, and then the time in which, the timeline of the story itself. I don't know why I keep doing that, but the space, there's like a point in time is what I'm looking at there. Okay, think about that. And how the theme relates based on those things. I'm giving you a little bit of hints here on how to write this without giving you too much, because I do want you to have freedom in being able to write this without being too honed into me asking you to do specific things in order. But when you talk about the theme, the historical and cultural context will also pop up to help validate why you're seeing this within the novel. I hope that helps. Okay, so novels explore universal themes often, and they transcend time and space. Sometimes there might be, like when we think about good and evil, you could think of, universal themes throughout humanity is considered what is good versus evil, like Lord of the Rings, right? We think of that would be very universal themes, because the time in which it was written still applies now, right? Where we also have individuals versus society, universal versus society. This book, Wild Meat and the Bully Burgers, has the universal theme of individual versus society. Who is Lovey based on who she is within society, and how that's impacting her and her growth throughout the novel. Okay. Obviously, there is a lot of very historical and cultural influence and themes for this particular book, especially being a Japanese American living on the island of Hawaii and the impact there. What's the historical context of the Japanese and living on the island? At what point was there an influx, kind of like in the United States, the influx of Germans and Vikings, and how that influenced certain parts of the United States? How did Japanese settlers coming into Hawaii impact the area, impact social norms? You tell me, what are you seeing as historical and cultural impacts of her identity in her location? And, again, gender plays a big role in this too. So I know that's a lot, it's heavy, but that's the point. Your goal here in literature is to be able to, in the very beginning of class, we talked about synthesizing, being able to layer thing after thing to understand how we came up with what we came up with. That's the goal here. So that's when we're talking about themes, and then we get into the context. This is where, when I pushed all semester, what's the theme? What's the historical context? Why? That's what I'm looking for. And again, I'm not looking for someone else's analytical review of this particular book. I want you to find history and then put that history to the book itself. Okay, it's not your research on someone else's research on the book. It's you looking at when the book was written, what histories, or what things have been happening historically around that time of the setting of the book that might have influenced the characters and what they're dealing with. And again, what kind of cultural contexts are happening? Being a Japanese girl in Hawaii during this time. Okay, so hopefully that helped you understand some of the themes. It's heavy and it's big, but we've been doing this practice all semester, so hopefully I'm giving you more answers than questions, right? Okay, so now that we kind of have a general idea, I'm gonna push a little more on themes and context within novels themselves and give you some examples to hopefully kind of help you go, okay, I think I kind of see where she's leaning on. When we talk about social and political themes, so our different themes overarching when we see within this book are different themes to pull from. We've got social and political themes, we've got psychological and philosophical themes, we have cultural and identity themes. Ding, 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 that's going to be your big guy for our particular novel. And then obviously historical context, which is a very, very big part of the book itself. So, uh, themes in novels in general. When we think about social and political themes, think about Oliver Twist from, again, Charles Dickens. I know I keep throwing him out there. But the idea here is Oliver, can I have some more, please? You guys ever hear that? More, please. The idea here is the harshness of Victorian England's workhouses and the treatment of the poor. Okay? I'm imagining at some point we were going to read Oliver Twist and be like, wow, we got to be careful within our current conditions. Like how can we use this literature to make sure we are not repeating certain aspects of history, right? What is he saying on a social and political theme that should be something that we should be mindful of? That's a point of literature, right? Is to share shared experiences and to try not to either repeat history or maybe learn from it. What are we learning from it? From things like Oliver Twist, and again, that political theme, that social context theme that he's trying to put out there. Oftentimes novels will reflect the social and political context in the time in which it was written. So for Charles Dickens was timely in Victorian England's workhouses. Like his was timely. His was making the statement during that moment. Same thing with Wild Meat and the Bully Burgers. This is why I keep saying find the historical, what's happening during that time that makes it so impactful that Lovey is having the struggles that she's having. Okay. Another common book I'm sure you've heard 100 times as we are in the current political state that we are in is George Orwell's 1984. George Orwell's 1984. Okay. Why is that book impactful? Because it's giving us themes of government control, surveillance, loss of individual freedoms, like literally screaming out loud, hey, be mindful of government takeover type of experiential things, which is really funny because when was this written? It was written in 1949 and what 1984 might look like. Okay, so something to be mindful of, because when we're thinking about time context, like historical context and time, this book originally was, let me see, it was published in 1949 with a predictive dialogue to what 1984 might look like. I mean, it's 2025 now, in 1949. That's not too far off from telling what the future might look like. How does George Orwell know that? George Orwell probably had a very good understanding of history in itself and how it could lean into the next phase of humanity. This is a cool thing about history and historical context, because when you use those, it helps us understand not just present, but possible future, how that might look based on the current trajectory of where society is going. That's how George Orwell is so able to write what he writes and kind of be pretty stinking on the nose, because he saw the trajectory. He saw what was to come based on the things that he's known before. Okay? I'm telling you, the first 2 chapters of that, when you read it, you're like, the thought police, get out of here. Like, I mean, I don't know how much we can say, that is necessarily possible today. But when you look at what he's writing, you're kind of like, wow, it's not too far off. I mean, we've got Alexas and we've got cameras. We have a lot of things that we use that show how we're living in life. Who's not to say that, he's not wrong, that government might have the surveillance on us that, I don't know, it gets conspiracy theory laden. But you know what I mean? Like, in other words, he's using historical context to show us how we can get to these points, using literature. Social and political themes, psychological and philosophical themes. We could use Crime and Punishment as an example. Frank Kafka's Metamorphosis is a great example. That was used back a couple weeks ago when I used that as one of our options. And I put it in short story before short story. It was one of those. I remember I used it because many of you used Metamorphosis as an example for you to do. I think it was historical and cultural context. Can't remember. Anyway, I'll put the link in there for you to take a look at. Really good, really, really warped. It's not a novel, it's actually more of a short story, but it's still a theme I think applies for what we're doing here. A great job using psychological. The main character turns into a big ass bug, and there's actually, I feel like, more social context to this in social themes and than there is psychological, but the psychological understanding of the family and their reactions to this kid turning into a bug. And maybe there's more philosophical themes going on in there. It's a big short story. So you can take a look at that and see where you might be seeing the characters' inner lives as this main character turns into a bug, and how they're living with it, trying to move around the house. It's just a mess. And maybe there's some motives. What are the motives behind the way the family is treating this bug in the house, and these struggles of them trying to deal with it, or are they even trying to deal with it, or do they just pretty much dismiss the bug until it crawls off and dies? Okay, and what is that saying about psychological families, the psychology within families, and their ability to take on something unlike the family member they used to know, right? Who the family member used to be to who they are now, and their way of dealing with that, and the psychological impact on the family. Okay, that was pretty heavy, but you get it. There might be a little bit of psychological themes within Wild Meat and the Bully Burgers. I think it kind of will go hand in hand with our next topic here, which is going to be cultural and identity themes. I'm going to kind of give you the answer here. The book mostly lies on that, the cultural and identity themes. Sprinkled in there, motivating these themes, is society, social norms, and what's the other ones? What are we looking at? Social norms. We also have social classes, morality. There's a lot of different parts of themes that go in there. You could say the theme of colonialism kind of plays a bit of a part in this too, especially when Lovey does not see herself represented in movies, in commercials, outside of her family and her culture. She doesn't see herself everywhere else. And how does that play and impact her identity, her self-worth, her understanding of self? Okay, all right. So again, many novels will address issues that relate to identity. Lots of them do. I think Metamorphosis actually kind of does a little bit of that too. But anyway, a lot of it, when we talk about identity, we are relating it to race, class, gender, and ethnicity. What do you know? Every single one of those points is in Wild Meat and the Bully Burgers. So when we talk about the theme within Wild Meat and the Bully Burgers, I'm going to tell you it's going to be cultural and identity themes. And we're looking at race, identity, class, gender, ethnicity, all of that. Bing, 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 bing. Show me where in the novel you're seeing those. Beloved, I don't have my Beloved out right now, but Toni Morrison's Beloved does a great job of that. If I can get a link to it in there, I will. These aren't books I expect you to read, but you're free to take a look at them and enjoy them for the beauty that they are. Adici's Americana, if I can find a link, I'll put that in there too. And that one, so Beloved's themes for identity and race really lean on understanding the legacy of slavery, racial identity, and the post-Civil War era within America. And how are the characters processing through that? Beloved is a good one. Damn, Toni Morrison's good. I should push more for Toni Morrison. Anyway, her books are heavy. They're beautiful. They're written very lyrically. It's probably best maybe in like a grad class. If I were to push for reading a novel, I would say Toni Morrison's. Any one of her books are amazing. Anyway, the reason why I don't push for her books is because the level in which it is written, brilliant, but it's really hard sometimes to decipher the language in which she's using because it's very lyrical. Anyway, other novels, again, like Adici's Americana, explore themes of, we got immigration, we've got identity, and the complexities of belonging in a globalized world. Whew, right? So what I love about novels is it dives deep into the complexities of not just the characters, but humanity itself. And it gives us a view into worlds we probably didn't see before. If it wasn't for Wild Meat and the Bully Burgers, I don't think I would have understand the need for, again, representation in places, or recognizing the struggle myself in becoming a woman and what it's like to be a female in a male driven world, or recognizing the understanding of I grew up in a Hispanic family. While I myself am not Hispanic, I grew up in understanding what that was like for me. So there was this level of understanding identity and culture and how it influenced who I am, or even who I was growing up, which is exactly what, Lovey's dealing with. Okay, so last but not least, again, historical context. I've probably beaten this like 1,000 times. Don't be mad. But it is important. It's super important, because if we're going to talk about cultural and identity themes like in Toni Morrison's Beloved, obviously the historical context of, post Civil War era America, that's huge. It's important. We have to talk about that. We have to say, this is why this book is important. This is why Beloved matters, is because it's talking about the legacy of slavery and racial identity in, again, post Civil War America. What does that look like? Hell, what does that look like now? Anyway, so we really need to make sure that we do understand the importance of having those historical contexts. What happened in that time that makes that important for the theme within the novel. Again, same thing with understanding Avicii's Americana's themes of immigration. What is that looking like? What is the history of that? America was built on immigration. That's full on who we are. We are a melting pot of all the peoples who came here looking for something big and beautiful. That's, we came here, we developed maybe a certain identity, or maybe we're struggling with identity because, when you immigrate, are you taking on the cultures of others just to survive? Are you continuing with the culture and the traditions in which you grew up on? And what does it mean to belong into a globalized world? Are you accepted? Are you denied? What does that look like? That's why the historical context matters, because they imply and help us understand the importance of why these themes are there, why identity matters. Okay. Again, historical context, when it was written, where it was written, these influence the writers. When we think about Lois Ann Yamanaka and her writing, the context, because when you hear rags and you think of many gentlemen within this class might not know this, but as females, when you have pads, we have a thing that goes into panties. They're like liners. They go in the bottom of it. But there was a time when it didn't just stick there with glue or stickiness. You had little, how do you call it? It was a waistband, and it had these little pieces. You could look it up, and they would connect to the pad itself. And that was how you had pads. I don't know enough about tampons to know, because I don't use them, so I don't understand them. But TMI, sorry, but doesn't matter. Whatever. We're humans, and we have human bodily things. We can talk about it. So they would have the straps, and they would have these little danglies, and they would strap on. And so the Kotex that Lovey's mom would have her get would be tapped in, tied into that. And I only know that because my mom still had hers, as she showed me once. I'm like, what is this? And she's like, let me show you. And she put it on, and they're clips, little clips clipped on. Anyway. If you did not know this, it doesn't make sense in the book if you've never seen it or understood it. When you're talking about the book, I encourage you to research what those look like, those Kotex with the clips and the belt. Take a look at it. I forget what she called it. It's like a period belt or something. Look it up. Understand the historical context. Understand why these things matter in that time and now. Like when you look back at it, it's like, wow, we've really gone far. In just, women's pads or something, right? Like that's important. That's a historical context that matters, not just in the novel, but our understanding of what Lovey was going through and the timeline in which it took place. Okay. Also, the historical context, if you can't figure out the era in which it was written, you can also know based on the fact that Lovey growing up was watching on television Shirley Temple. When was Shirley Temple aired on TV. Well, that's kind of that's a little complexing because I used to watch I Love Lucy, which was in black and white when I was a kid, which was way before my time. So use some of these cultural contexts to help you understand the historical context of the book itself. So it's layered for a reason. I do this because I trust you and I know that you have the capabilities of finding this information and backing it up with the book itself. Okay, when we talk about historical context, we also want to think about things like Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. That is just heavy with historical everything, implications, and just the power of it. So we think about the racial tensions and the injustices of the American South during the Great Depression. I think many of you, I don't know if you had that in your repertoire of things you learned when you were in elementary school and high school, but the Kill the Mockingbird is a very big, important thing. Just like Huckleberry Finn is a big one. Anyway, there's a lot of these that really, while sometimes they're hard to read, the importance of them is, yes, it should be hard to read. We should be infuriated at these injustices within either the American South or America in general. That's why historical context matters. Again, Grapes of Wrath. John Steinbeck has a lot of great books that really help us understand historical context for the time. We think about the Grapes of Wrath was actually talking about the plight of the migrant worker during the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. If you don't know what the Dust Bowl is, take a look at that. That's also really important because we might be heading for a couple of those Dust Bowls as we see bigger changes in climate. As people and farmers come through, and maybe if we hit another Great Depression, which is always possible, that's just kind of like the way the world works. When we look at the plight of those who worked on the fields during that time, the historical context of how it applies to the Grapes of Wrath, and his goal here is for us to give a better understanding of things that happened in the United States that were very impactful, especially during the 30s, during the Depression, things that maybe potentially we might see in our lifetime. I don't know. I'm not a future teller, but it's important that we look back at these stories and go, wow, that happened. What's the possibility of that happening again? What historical things have happened then that could potentially happen now to get us into that same boat? All right, take a look at the history, take a look at the book. Okay, that was a lot, and we're almost an hour in. I don't apologize because I'm giving you everything I could possibly give you in order for you to be as well versed in literature as I possibly can. Please take a look at the links that I give you. I don't expect you to read entire novels aside from the one that I give you, Wild Meat and the Bully Burgers, but you are free to take a look at any of the links just to kind of get an idea of, again, language, dialogue, that sort of thing that really pushes forth these stories, kind of thing. All right, that is it for now. Thank you very much. I'm looking very much forward to your analytical review of the novel that we're reading. It's going to be big, but I have complete and utter faith that you will absolutely knock it out of the park because you've had great practice in doing this. So anyway, we'll get to that soon. I'm excited to see what you come up with.